Picture the familiar routine. You walk into the vet's office, the sterile smell of the clinic lingering in the air, and you nod along as you are handed a brightly colored pamphlet about balanced feline nutrition. For decades, the standard advice has been incredibly consistent, almost deeply comforting in its simplicity. A scoop of dry kibble in the morning, maybe a tiny spoonful of canned food as a weekend treat, and a bowl of fresh water left out by the fridge. But what if that deeply ingrained, conventional wisdom is fundamentally flawed? What if you walked into your kitchen right now, gathered every single bag of dry, crunchy food you own, and threw it all directly into the trash? What actually happens inside the complex biological machinery of your cat's body if you make the radical decision to switch them to a 100% wet food diet? It sounds extreme. We have been thoroughly conditioned by multi-billion-dollar marketing campaigns to believe that a bowl of dry food, left out all day for convenience, is just the normal, natural way to feed a feline. But there is a silent damage occurring right under our noses, hidden behind the sheer convenience of a scoop. The concept of this silent damage isn't about immediate, visible illness. It is the unsettling reality that a lifetime of dry food is an invisible, painless, and tragically slow progression toward systemic organ failure. Today, we are going to bypass the marketing slogans and map out the exact, fascinating, biological timeline of what happens when a cat's body is finally given the precise moisture-rich diet it evolved to consume. You might think you already know the basics of pet nutrition, but the internal transformation that takes place when you eliminate dry food completely is nothing short of a physiological rescue mission. Moving into the first major pillar of this transformation, we have to talk about hydration. But we need to bypass the basic, repetitive advice of just making sure your cat drinks water and take a deep, biological dive into your cat's ancestry. The domestic cat currently sleeping on your sofa or watching birds out the window is, on a biological level, a tiny tiger. They are direct descendants of the African wildcat, a desert-dwelling predator perfectly adapted to incredibly arid environments. Because fresh water sources in the desert are scarce and dangerous, nature designed these felines with a brilliant evolutionary workaround. They get almost all of their required hydration directly through the blood and tissue of their prey. They are quite literally designed to eat their water. Think about the stark mathematical contrast here. A mouse or a small bird running through the grass is composed of roughly 70 to 80% water. It is a highly hydrating, nutrient-dense meal. Now, look closely at a piece of dry kibble. Through the intense extrusion and baking process required to give it that incredibly long shelf life, it is reduced to a mere 7 to 10% moisture. That is a catastrophic biological gap. Because cats evolved to rely entirely on their food for moisture, their natural thirst drive is notoriously weak. They simply do not possess the neurological trigger to feel thirsty the way a dog or a human does until they are already significantly dehydrated. Consequently, when you feed a cat a strictly dry diet, they exist in a perpetual state of chronic, low-grade dehydration. This isn't just about feeling a little parched. This is where the silent, systemic damage takes root. Without adequate, constant moisture, the cat's blood physically thickens. Imagine the sheer mechanical stress this places on the cardiovascular system. Your cat's tiny heart is forced to work overtime, pumping a thicker, more viscous, sludgier fluid through its circulatory system every second of every day. It puts a relentless strain on the heart muscle and the delicate blood vessels. But perhaps the most immediate and dangerous consequence of this dehydration happens further down the urinary tract. When a cat doesn't take in enough water, their highly efficient kidneys attempt to conserve whatever moisture is left by hyper-concentrating the urine. The bladder subsequently transforms into a dark, highly concentrated, and overly acidic environment. It becomes the absolute perfect, undisturbed breeding ground for microscopic minerals to clump together, eventually forming deadly crystals and agonizing bladder stones. It is exactly like leaving a glass of heavily salted water out in the hot sun. As the water slowly evaporates, the salt crystallizes at the bottom. That exact chemical process is happening inside your cat's kidneys and bladder when they only eat dry food. But what happens when you flip the script and switch to a 100% wet food diet? The physiological relief is almost instantaneous. Within the very first week of an all-wet diet, the kidneys finally receive the massive, life-saving flush of water they have been desperately needing for years. The specific gravity of the urine normalizes and dilutes. The immediate risk of crystal formation plummets drastically. The blood volume expands to a healthy level, meaning the heart no longer has to struggle to push thick fluid through the veins. You are essentially taking a high-performance engine that has been running dangerously hot for years and finally flooding it with the exact coolant it requires. It is a profound, systemic sigh of relief that echoes through your cat's entire internal ecosystem. Next, we have to tackle the issue of weight control, but we need to frame this not as a simple diet, but as a complete metabolic rescue mission. Let's talk honestly about the physical shape of the modern house cat. If you have a feline that is carrying a bit too much weight, or even bordering on obese, you have almost certainly received the standard advice: feed them a little less of their dry food, or transition them to a highly processed, expensive weight management kibble. But to understand why this rarely works, we have to look at the sheer absurdity of the ingredients. Feeding an obligate, strict carnivore a daily diet consisting of 25 to 50% dietary starch is fundamentally insane. Imagine taking a trip to the zoo, walking up to the lion enclosure, and watching the highly trained zookeepers pour out a giant, heaping bowl of sugary breakfast cereal for the apex predators. You would immediately recognize that as abuse. Yet, because the cereal is shaped like little brown fish and packaged in a bag with a smiling cartoon cat, we do the exact same thing in our kitchens every single day. Cats have absolutely zero biological requirement for carbohydrates. Their exceptionally short digestive tracts and unique liver enzymes are perfectly designed to convert pure animal protein and animal fat directly into usable energy. But dry food cannot physically exist without starch. Manufacturers need potatoes, peas, corn, wheat, or tapioca to act as the glue that holds that little crunchy nugget together during the extreme high-heat baking process. And here is where we need to pull back the curtain on a massive industry secret. Because a cat's palate naturally rejects these bland, starchy, biologically useless fillers, the pet food industry has to resort to chemical trickery. After the kibble is baked, it is aggressively sprayed with a coating of rendered animal fats and highly engineered synthetic flavor enhancers known in the industry as palatants. This process essentially turns a useless, cardboard-like carbohydrate pellet into a highly addictive, irresistible junk food. When your cat eats this heavily sprayed kibble, those dense carbohydrates hit their system and cause their blood sugar to violently spike. And just like we see in human medicine, chronic, daily blood sugar spikes inevitably lead to a state of insulin resistance. The cat's body enters a state of metabolic panic. It grabs all those excess, unusable carbohydrates circulating in the blood and immediately stores them as stubborn layers of fat, usually hanging right around their primordial pouch. But when you make the bold transition to a 100% wet food diet, you are manually initiating a complete metabolic reset. By removing the kibble, you instantly cut the carbohydrate intake down to almost zero. The violent, daily blood sugar spikes come to an abrupt halt. The pancreas finally gets a break, and the dangerous insulin resistance slowly begins to reverse itself. Because high-quality wet food is densely packed with species-appropriate animal protein, it promotes genuine, lasting cellular satiety. The cat actually feels full. Consequently, the body stops hoarding emergency fat and finally starts utilizing those stored fat reserves for daily energy, all while safely preserving the vital lean muscle mass. Over a period of several months, you will literally watch the excess fat melt away, revealing the sleek, agile, and muscular predator that has been hiding underneath all that starchy bloat. It fundamentally changes the entire physical architecture and metabolic destiny of the animal. As this internal metabolic healing progresses, it inevitably pushes its way to the surface, bringing us to our third pillar: physical appearance. Specifically, we need to look at the coat, but with a highly strategic twist that challenges everything you thought you knew. The third major shift you will notice happens right beneath your fingertips when you pet your cat. A feline's coat is not just fur, it is a massive, complex organ system and a direct, undeniable visual indicator of what is happening internally. When you eliminate the dry, starchy, moisture-depleted fillers of kibble and replace them with the incredibly rich, bioavailable animal-based fats, omega fatty acids, and pure protons found in wet food, the skin barrier begins to repair itself at a cellular level.
That annoying, persistent, flaky dander that you constantly brush off your dark clothes begins to disappear entirely. The hair follicles become stronger. The fur itself transforms, becoming incredibly soft, densely packed, and developing a brilliant, glossy sheen that you simply cannot replicate with supplements while feeding a baseline diet of dry kibble. You will even notice a drastic, welcome reduction in the amount of daily shedding. The cat stops looking dusty and starts looking vibrant. But right about now, as we praise the benefits of soft, wet food, a massive, almost universal objection usually pops into the minds of pet owners. It is the age-old, deeply ingrained warning you hear everywhere. Doesn't my cat need dry food to keep their teeth clean? We need to completely and utterly dismantle this dangerous myth right now. The pervasive idea that crunchy kibble somehow scrapes plaque off a cat's teeth is arguably one of the most successful. Persistent marketing illusions in the entire history of the pet food industry. Let's look closely at the actual mechanical anatomy of how a cat eats. Open a cat's mouth and look at their teeth. They do not have flat molars like humans or cows, which are designed for grinding plant matter side to side. A cat's teeth are sharp, jagged carnassial shears, designed strictly to slice cleanly through raw meat, tendon, and bone.
So good.
When a cat bites down on a hard piece of kibble, the pellet doesn't gently scrape down the side of the tooth. It simply shatters on impact. The tips of the teeth break the kibble into swallowable shards, meaning there is absolutely zero abrasive scraping action happening along the gum line, which is precisely where dangerous dental disease actually originates. In fact, feeding dry food does the exact opposite of cleaning the teeth, because kibble is heavily loaded with refined carbohydrates and starches. Those shattered, tiny fragments mix with the cat's saliva and turn into a sticky, starchy paste. This invisible paste aggressively clings to the teeth and the gum line, providing an absolute feast for the harmful bacteria in the mouth. These bacteria consume the sugars from the carbs and excrete acids that rot the teeth and inflame the gums. Feeding a cat dry kibble to clean their teeth is the exact biological equivalent of a human eating a handful of dry crackers and genuinely expecting it to replace brushing their teeth. It is absurd. Now, wet food is obviously not inherently a toothbrush either. It is soft. But the critical difference is that wet food does not leave a sticky, highly fermentable carbohydrate residue behind to accelerate decay. If you genuinely want to keep your cat's teeth clean and prevent painful extractions down the line, you have to actively brush them with pet-safe toothpaste. Or you need to offer appropriate raw meaty bones that force them to chew and genuinely scrape the gums. But you absolutely must stop relying on a starchy, baked cookie to do a job it was never physically designed to do. Moving into the fourth section, we have to analyze a fascinating and often frustrating aspect of living with a feline, their feeding behavior. We are going to explore the complex psychology of the begging cat. If you share your home with a cat that constantly screams for food, weaves between your legs every time you walk anywhere near the kitchen, or ruthlessly wakes you up by pawing at your face at 4 in the morning, you probably just assume you have an exceptionally greedy or food-obsessed animal, but you don't. You have a cat that is trapped in a vicious cycle of a massive carbohydrate crash.
But you usually do.
Because dry food is so high in simple starches, it digests rapidly and spikes the blood sugar violently, which inevitably leads to a steep, rapid drop just a few hours later. Your cat isn't just acting out to annoy you. Their cells are literally screaming for appropriate nutrition. They are experiencing the feline equivalent of a severe sugar crash. They are desperately lacking cellular satiety. Even if their stomach is physically stretched full of dry, expanding kibble. When you successfully transition a cat to an all-wet diet, the behavioral shift that occurs is nothing short of stunning. You are essentially transitioning them away from frantic, addictive, dopamine-driven eating habits Because wet food is incredibly dense in pure animal protein and healthy fats, it takes much longer for the body to break down. It provides a slow, steady, consistent release of energy into the bloodstream. Once the cat's body realizes it is finally receiving the deep nutrition it craves, the frantic begging begins to subside. Those agonizing 4 a.m. wake-up calls slowly fade away. The cat settles into a calm, sustained, quiet predator energy. They eat their meal, they feel deeply, profoundly satisfied on a cellular level, and they go about their day, resting peacefully instead of anxiously waiting by the food bowl. However, getting to this state of behavioral zen is rarely a walk in the park. We have to have a serious conversation about the withdrawal phase. Remember those highly engineered synthetic flavor enhancers and sprayed-on animal digests we talked about earlier? Your cat's brain is likely heavily addicted to them. When you suddenly take away the hyper-palatable dry food and offer a plate of healthy, natural, moisture-rich meat, your cat might look at you with utter disgust, as if you are trying to serve them poison. They're essentially going through a very real detox from junk food. It requires an immense amount of patience on your part. You have to remember that you are dealing with a tiny addict who is being offered a plain, healthy salad after a lifetime of eating nothing but heavily seasoned, artificially flavored potato chips. They will protest. They will hold out. But understanding the psychology behind their refusal is the key to helping them push through it. But as this narrative reaches its climax, we need to introduce a crucial element: the hidden risk. Because deciding to go 100% wet food isn't just a matter of opening cans and feeling good about yourself. It introduces very real logistical challenges and significant health dangers that you absolutely must be prepared to manage. When you feed dry food, you can pour it into a bowl and leave it exposed to the open air for days without it spoiling. It is functionally dead food. Wet food, however, is a completely different biological material. It is real, moisture-rich meat. And the second you open that can or pouch and it hits the oxygen at room temperature, it becomes a ticking biological clock for rapid bacterial proliferation. You absolutely cannot free-feed wet food. You can no longer leave a bowl out for them to graze on casually throughout the afternoon. You have to fundamentally change your routine and implement strict portion control alongside highly scheduled meal times. If your cat leaves wet food sitting in their bowl for more than 2 hours, it becomes a breeding ground for dangerous pathogens like Salmonella and E. coli, and it must be ruthlessly thrown away. You have to wash the bowls thoroughly after every single meal to prevent dangerous biofilm buildup. Furthermore, and perhaps most importantly, there is a massive, potentially fatal physiological danger in switching a cat's diet too fast.
All right, buddy.
A cat's
Dinner time.
gastrointestinal tract is
Just need to
incredibly
mix this
sensitive,
up a little bit.
and their delicate gut microbiome has adapted specifically over the years to digest exactly whatever they are currently eating. If you abruptly take away the kibble they have eaten for years and suddenly drop a giant pile of rich, dense wet food into their bowl, you are going to induce severe gastrointestinal shock. We are talking about explosive diarrhea, intense vomiting, and a complete stubborn refusal to eat anything at all. And a cat that stops eating entirely is in grave danger. If a feline fasts for just a couple of days, their body begins mobilizing fat stores to the liver so quickly that the liver becomes completely overwhelmed, leading to a fatal condition called hepatic lipidosis,
That's
or
exactly
fatty
what
liver
I
disease.
needed.
Therefore, the transition must be meticulously,
enjoy it.
almost painfully
I
slow.
will.
We are talking about a highly controlled, gradual shift spanning anywhere from 2 to 4 full weeks. You start on day 1 by simply taking a tiny pea-sized spoonful of wet food and hiding it inside their normal kibble. Over the next several weeks, you agonizingly slowly increase the ratio of the wet food while simultaneously decreasing the dry food. This incredibly slow pace allows the pH of their stomach acid and the specific bacteria in their gut the necessary time to physically adapt to breaking down this new RICH protein source. It is a marathon, not a sprint, and rushing it will only result in sickness and intense frustration. To help you successfully navigate this difficult transition period, there is an expert-level extra tip that taps directly into the ancient, wild instincts buried deep within your cat's DNA. It all comes down to the science of temperature. Nobody likes cold, unappetizing leftovers, and that is especially true for an apex predator. If you are storing leftover wet food in the refrigerator, you absolutely must not serve it cold straight from the fridge. Cold food suppresses the natural aromas of the meat, and more importantly, it signals to the cat's highly sensitive brain that the prey they are about to eat is long dead, old, and potentially unsafe to consume. Instead, you need to mimic nature. Take that portion of wet food and microwave it for just a few seconds. Or stir in a little bit of warm, not boiling, but warm water. Your ultimate goal is to bring the temperature of that food up to roughly 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Why? Because that is the exact, precise body temperature of a living mouse. This simple, seemingly minor temperature shift works absolute magic. It releases the savory, rich aromas of the animal fats and proteins, sending a powerful signal straight to the cat's Jacobson's organ. It's been instantly triggering those dormant, hardwired predatory instincts. It can often convince even the most stubborn, kibble-addicted cat to drop their guard and take that crucial first bite. Transitioning your cat to an entirely wet food diet is an undeniable investment. It requires an investment of your time to schedule meals, an investment of your money to buy quality food, and a massive investment of your patience to outlast their junk food withdrawals. But when you truly understand the profound biological rescue mission, you are performing when you realize you are saving their kidneys. Protecting their heart and reversing metabolic damage, it changes everything about how you view mealtime. You aren't just casually feeding a pet anymore. You are deeply nourishing a highly specialized, incredibly complex, obligate carnivore. So, as you look at your own feline companion, what is the biggest, most frustrating struggle you are currently facing with your cat's diet right now?